Welcome back to Winning Isn't Easy. How can you use Social Security disability insurance regulations on impairment to overcome an ERISA disability carrier or plan denial or termination of benefits for IC? Now, I will tell you that disability carriers or plans often require that the policyholder or plan beneficiary have an impairment. Unfortunately, many times that term is not defined in the policy or plan, and the carrier kind of creates their own definition of impairment. And they do that in interstitial IC claims. So as a practical matter, what they're looking for is an impairment that results from anatomical, physiological, or psychological abnormalities that can be shown by medically acceptable clinical and laboratory diagnostic techniques. They're not going to take your word for it that you've got symptoms of IC, that you have an impairment. In fact, a diagnosis of IC doesn't necessarily translate into disability. It's just a diagnosis. So how do we at Cavey Law address the issue of impairment in an IC claim? Well, one of the things we do, even though this is not a Social Security claim, is we look at Social Security Regulation SSR 15-1 as a guidance. And if there is no definition of impairment in the policy and they're requiring an impairment, I argue that this Social Security regulation provides guidance on how to define an impairment, and they should be using this guideline. So let's talk about Social Security Ruling 15-1P and your interstitial cystitis claim. This regulation specifically addresses what you have to prove in the context of a Social Security case to be entitled to your benefits. And again, I think that this is analogous to what needs to be proven in a ERISA disability IC claim. And what the regulation says is IC constitutes a medically determinable impairment when it produces appropriate symptoms and medical signs or laboratory findings and may result in disabling impairment. Now, there are some findings that are universally accepted, and Social Security has a laundry list of those signs that they are looking for. And so I'm going to read you Section C of the regulation. Medical science can support a diagnosis of IC and can help establish a medically determinable impairment. These signs can include the following, which can be detected during a medical procedure that stretches the bladder with fluid, cystoscopy under anesthesia with bladder distension. And so what they're looking for is fibrosis, bladder wall stiffening, diffuse pinpoint bleeding caused by recurrent irritation on the bladder wall, and Hunner's ulcers, which are patches of broken skin on the bladder wall. They're also looking for laboratory findings that can support the diagnosis of IC, and they accept the following laboratory findings: repeat sterile urine cultures while IC symptoms continue, positive potassium sensitivity test known as a Parsons test, and an anti-proliferative factor, APF, accumulation in the urine. They're also willing to look at other signs and findings, and the Social Security in this regulation acknowledges that because of ongoing research into the cause of IC, the medical criteria discussed above are only examples of signs and laboratory findings that establish a medically determinable impairment. In other words, they're not all inclusive. But I use this laundry list of testing and test results and other criteria to establish that my client has a medically determinable impairment. So how do we best document that impairment in an IC ERISA disability claim? Your medical records, as I said, should document all the items found in Social Security Regulation 15-1P. I also, in my Social Security and ERISA disability cases, have the physicians complete a bladder problem medical opinion or IC residual functional capacity form. Now, these forms were developed by us Social Security lawyers to help Social Security applicants get their benefits. But I think that this can help in a ERISA disability claim because the disability carrier or plans attending physician reports don't ask the right questions. I think that using the ICRC form or the bladder form and Social Security Regulation 15-1P can be used in combination to help overcome a disability carrier or plan's wrongful denial or termination of benefits on the basis that you don't, quote unquote, have an impairment. Got it? Let's take a break.
You a professional with questions about your individual disability policy? You need the Disability Insurance Claim Survival Guide for Professionals. This book gives you a comprehensive understanding of your disability policy, with tips and to-dos that will assist you in submitting a winning disability application. This is one you don't want to miss. For the next 24 hours, we're giving away free copies of the Disability Insurance Claim Survival Guide for Professionals. Order yours today at disabilityclaimsforprofessionals.com.